Hello everybody, it's Steve. How are you all doing today? I'm just out for a wee little walk, and well, if you're watching this video brand new, you'll know that it is May 14th, 2021, a new day, a new story. But before we get to that, remember as always to like, share, subscribe, hit up my Patreon if you want to help me out that way. I'm always posting new stuff there for you in exchange for you helping me out. If you want to help me out on my Patreon, even if it's just $1, I really, truly, deeply appreciate it. The link to that is in the description with this video, as well as the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages closely related to the content I'm posting both on my This Day in History channel, as well as my primary channel, Steve the Amateur Historian. You can watch these videos on either one. So, that's that. Let's talk about another case, because I guess I've covered this type of thing a few times. Another case of someone kind of doing something in record time. I've talked about record length elementary school fire drills, a record timing for guys putting a fire out. It's a popular thing in old newspapers, like so-and-so did this in record time. However, in this case, we're talking about a criminal. So we're traveling back to May 14th, 1927. And on the east side of Portland, which, you know, essentially anything east side of the Willamette River, and it's not Willamette. Maybe it technically is, I don't know. Just, it's one of those things where people who don't live around here call it Willamette. In Portland, people call it Willamette. I'm not sure which one's right, I just know which one is more common. Anyway, so on the east side of Portland, there was an unnamed robber. At the time this particular article was published, it was unknown who did it, so I don't know if this guy was ever captured or anything like that. But this guy, I don't know how stealthy he was, but this guy was fast. Like, fast. According to the local newspapers, this guy managed to successfully rob 3 different stores in 10 minutes. Now, the headline of the article simply states, robs 3 stores in 10 minutes. Whereas the article itself, in the verbiage, says it may have been 10 to 12 minutes. So, of course, they use the 10-minute figure because it's shorter and it's more exciting. And, of course, you want to grab people's attention with the headline. And, you know, we have a tendency to break things down into a matter of like 5 or 10 minutes. If someone's 17 minutes away from a place, they say, oh, I'm about 15 minutes away, you know. So, a pretty impressive feat. Now, I've always been mildly critical of these articles because I know a lot of them were just these little pieces snuck in there to kind of capture people's attention. Wow, how did somebody do that? Again, you know, this article I read a few weeks back about, you know, a guy putting a volunteer fire department crew responding to, going to, and putting out a fire in like 7 minutes. And I'm just like, I don't believe it. Or was it 16 minutes? Yeah, I don't even remember anymore. This story, though, I'm a little bit more inclined to believe than the others. I can only assume that they based the time figure of how this guy was able to rob 3 different stores in such a short time period with whenever the police were contacted. It was probably, since they say 10 to 12 minutes, I'm assuming after the first robbery was done, you know, whoever, the proprietor of that place, contacted the authorities. They have a time for when the authorities were contacted. And the third and final place that was robbed probably called the police 12 minutes later, and that's how they were able to discern that actual time figure. That's my presumption. They may just be, you know, guesstimating in general, like, oh, these 3 robberies happened between, you know, 12 and 12:30 in the afternoon, so we'll say it was more within like a 15-minute time span. So what the hey, let's say it was 10 minutes, and then it sounds wild and almost impossible. And if that is the case, if this did happen in 10 to 12 minutes, it would have been possible. The one particular of it would be that whoever did this would have had to have had a vehicle, whether they were driving that vehicle or they had an accomplice who was driving and then sitting in the vehicle while he was doing the robberies. Because in the article, the first and third places that were robbed, the actual intersection where the stores were located is given, so you can discern how far the criminal would have had to travel in that 10-minute period. It doesn't give the name of the second store, but the article does state that from the first location he traveled south, and that would make sense because the third store was south of the first one. So it's like he hit a spot here, hit a spot here, hit a spot here. Seems to be what happened. Now, again, robbing a place is, it's going to be pretty quick, because you come running in there with a gun and you say, put all your money in the bag. The proprietor, unless of course they're, daredevils, which it seems like none of these three proprietors were, they complied. Wasn't worth risking losing their life over whatever money they had, at least in the circumstances of these three places that got hit up. So a person is going to comply rather quickly when that gun goes up, put your money in the bag. They're going to comply rather quickly. So the time in which it would have taken to rob these places individually would have been fairly brief. But still, it would have taken up some time. It would have taken at least like a minute, maybe a minute or two. You'd probably give at least 4 to 5 minutes for just the time going in, robbing the places, and then departing. So, the guy only has at most 5 or 6 minutes under those circumstances. If it took him 12 minutes to do everything, it took him like 6 or 7 minutes. But whatever the case, he would have less than 10 minutes to traverse between these individual stores. Now, the first place he knocked up, that's not right. The first place he robbed, let's just say that, was at 39th and Stark Street. That would be southeast 39th and Stark Street. He then hit up a second store a little south of there, and then the last store he hit up was at southeast 37th and Division. At least that's what it would be today. It probably would have just been generally 37th and Division. Now, 39th and Stark to 37th and Division, that's 22 blocks. So there's no way that this guy could have, been on foot. I don't even think if he was on like a bicycle, I don't think he could have made it in time. So that's why I say this guy absolutely had to have had a vehicle that, again, either he was driving or an accomplice was driving, because he could not have traversed that distance in anything but an automobile. And it's 1927, enough people had cars by that time. So, you give him 5-6 minutes travel time, you can easily traverse 22 blocks in a couple of minutes. So that's entirely possible. And if you give the guy a minute or two in each establishment to rob him, I know like the second place he robbed, he only took there's only like $50 there, so that would be a quick take. That's a couple bills. The first place he robbed, he took like $54 and change, which is still not a whole lot. They said his whole take between these three establishments was $175. So that's an average of like, what, a little less than $60 a place. So it wouldn't take them, he wasn't robbing these places for thousands where they're having to cycle through bills and find stacks, So unlike a lot of these previous stories I've covered where they say so-and-so did this in, this amount of time, what a phenomenon, it would have been possible for this guy to do what he did. And that could have been part of the plan, was I'm going to hit up as many stores as possible in a short period of time, so that even by the time I'm robbing the last one, the police aren't even at the first location. So by the time he's fleeing the last place, the police are still wrapped up in just figuring out what happened at the first location. And by the time they get to the second and third locations, that thief is long gone with his take, which $175, that's nothing now, but in 1927, I don't know exactly how much that would have been. It would have been this much. I'll obviously have to have added that time figure in after looking it up, but it would have been a significantly higher take than what $175 now, 94 years later, would be. So, you know, I don't know if this guy was just out for a thrill. How many places can I rob real quick? Or if it was planned out that way. You know, a lot of thieves and whatnot, one of the things they try to do, and, you know, even though it was the 1920s when this happened and, you know, criminal behavior was not quite as sophisticated, you know, they would discuss and plot out things like that. You know, like, you know, predicting how long it would take for the police to respond to a certain thing. And, you know, they could have maybe predicted from the moment we leave that first establishment, assuming the proprietor is going to call the police, which seems would, in all likelihood, would happen. How much time realistically would we have from the moment we leave and he dials 911 to the police having to get to that location, discuss with the proprietor what happened, what did the guy look like, all that stuff? How much time in there could you buy? How many places could you rob in that period of time? And they probably gave themselves about 10, 12, 15 minutes to work with. I'm saying they because, again, he might have had an accomplice who was the driver. That may have been their plan as well. Obviously, I can't say for certain. It could have been just, again, it could have just been a thrill. How many places can I rob in less than 15 minutes? Hey, I robbed 3 places in less than 15 minutes. I'm a badass. That could have been it as well. But it was just interesting. I love stumbling onto these stories involving these situations where it's like so-and-so dramatically pulled this off in such and such number of time. And initially it seems impossible, and a lot of times if you actually take some time to think it over logistically, it is impossible. But this one, not so much. This unnamed robber might have pulled it off. And the article never really discussed, you know, it's a pretty simple process. You go in with a gun, you say, give me your money, they're going to give you your money. They didn't discuss, you know, obviously the whole article is fixated on the time figure. How did he do it? But they didn't say whether the guy had like a mask on. Was this guy like was he doing the whole thing? Was he just like there, you know, with his face fully exposed so he could easily be, I mean, granted, it was the 1920s, you know, even if you did get a good look at someone, it was a lot harder to catch people back then. Obviously, police methods were considerably more primitive. There was, as I've said in numerous videos, back in the good old days of Portland, you know, the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, into the 50s, robberies were a pandemic. Now that that's become a much more commonly used word, they were a pandemic on the face of Portland. Robberies were, you know, a dime a dozen back then. So I don't know if this guy, you know, made sure to wear a mask, if he had any other process he followed. I really don't know. So still, a pretty straightforward story, yet eclipsed by mystery. Well, they still didn't even know who the guy was that did this. They just knew that he was very quick. I'm not drinking cherry Coke, you're drinking cherry Coke. So, again, the focus was the time figure. And I just thought it was interesting. I love those types of stories where they pull you in by having a headline that seems practically impossible. Was the guy captured? I don't know. It's part of the fun. You know, when I read stories like this, I kind of get caught in the middle a little bit. Like, you ripped people off, you're an asshole, you deserve to be caught. But I'm also like, that's pretty impressive. Like, A for effort, F for ethical behavior, I guess. So in the end, you get like a C, middle of the road C. That's my grade for this guy in his efforts. What kind of grade would you give him? I don't know why I'm going off on that tangent. Start grading the people in all these individual stories and their behaviors as a whole. Grade them A through F. Or if you want to use the old elementary scale, were they not satisfactory, satisfactory, or excellent? Anyway, that's the story, and I'm sticking to it, of a guy that, according to the newspaper, pulled off 3 robberies in 10 to 12 minutes. I'd like to thank you so much for stopping by, as always, for supporting me, my channel, this particular series. You want to help me blossom and grow, remember to like, share, subscribe, hit up my Patreon. I'm always posting new stuff there for you. Even if you only got $1, like, think of it, 100 different people give me $1, well, that's $100 going towards me being able to do what I do. So even small amounts are massively helpful. The link to my Patreon is in the description below, along with the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages closely related to the content I'm producing, both on my This Day in History channel specifically, and my primary channel, Steve the Amateur Historian. You can watch these videos on either one. So all that said, this has been Steve, and I'll see you tomorrow.